All right, so today is going to be a little bit different in that I am going to kind of go through this box of radioactive stuff that was sent to me from a subscriber on Patreon. So when I originally got these items, I took them all out and examined them and kind of got radiation readings on them to make sure that there was nothing in there dangerous to me or to anyone being around it. So a lot of these items were wrapped up in aluminum foil. And this isn't the best thing to have with radioactive items because there can actually, a reaction can occur between the alpha radiation that a lot of these items give off and the aluminum foil, which actually causes neutrons to come off of that reaction. And so the risk is really low of you actually transmuting one non-radioactive element into another because you need a lot of neutrons to do something like that. But it's generally not a good idea to wrap stuff up in aluminum foil. Resealable plastic bags I found are be a lot more helpful in containing contamination. I mean, none of it's going to stop the radiation, even though this case does do a pretty good job at containing the radiation that's inside of here. And just to show you, just give you a little kind of baseline of what's going on here. So I got my Rad IB20 here, and there's a slight increase in radiation, getting like 115, 120 counts per minute. But if I open up the case, it's very different. So this case actually does do a really good job at containing radiation. And even with the more sensitive Radicode 103, like you hear the radiation, but it's nothing crazy like when it's off. It's definitely more active than with this on. I hear you. Don't worry about it. So I'll just put this lid over here and just kind of put the objects down way over here. So I'm going to pull out some of these guys. And this is one of the very first objects here. This is actually, a lot of these are going to be americium smoke detectors. That's what I've noticed in this collection that this person sent me. And these aren't too terribly dangerous. They can be a contamination problem if they're leaking or if they're starting to flake off or something like that. But a lot of these industrial smoke detectors like this one isn't going to cause that type of problem because of the way that the material was made. It was made not to leak. It was made to be just one solid piece of metal that's emitting all of the alpha radiation inside of here. Now, to contain my contamination, I'm wearing gloves when handling this stuff. Now, this isn't going to stop any of the radiation. This is mainly just for contamination purposes because wearing gloves when you're handling radioactive material, especially like uranium ore or something along those lines, or old watches that have like flaking off uranium paint, it's good to have some way to kind of keep your level of contamination down and to make it to where your process of decontamination is a lot easier for you. Instead of trying to scrub contamination out of your fingers or out from underneath your fingernails, that can be kind of problematic. It can be kind of a pain and a little worrisome at times when it doesn't clean off right away. So I would suggest whenever you're handling radioactive material to actually wear gloves. It's very handy. It's not going to stop the radiation, like I said, but it's very handy at containing contamination. Now, I haven't figured out how to actually take this one apart, and this one actually seems like it's not really made to be taken apart. I mean, there are these clips that are here that looks like I probably could pry these open and actually open this up, but for the sake of keeping this video kind of short, I'm not going to just dismantle this one. But to show you how radioactive this is, I'm going to have this one right here. So it's not too terribly radioactive. So there's probably a little bit of americium inside of here. So while I was making this video, something kind of bothered me about this particular smoke detector. At least I think that's what it is now. Now that I'm thinking about it more, it actually might be some type of like maybe heat sensor or something like that, because this is not radioactive at all. Not even a little bit. And so, not sure what it was doing inside of this collection in the first place, and maybe it just picked up some type of contamination. But what fooled me initially when I was doing this video was that how all those other radioactive sources, like just right over here, and that's what was triggering this Radicode 103 to show a higher than normal radiation level. So there's nothing radioactive in this one. I just wanted to clarify that. It was like really bugging me when I was editing this video, and I had to go back and actually look at this one to double check and make sure that it actually was radioactive, which it isn't. Okay, let's go on to the next thing of what's inside of here. Because there are some interesting items, like things that are not in my collection. So it was fascinating to see like what is in here. So right here, I'm going to turn off the clicker on this guy. Okay, so these are from different smoke detectors. Now these are kind of cool and they're very active. Like if I'll show, if you put them up to a Geiger counter, they are extremely active, but they aren't dangerous unless you're being extremely careless with them. We have this guy right here. Now this is probably one of the inside or one of the internal sources of one of these industrial smoke detectors that's using americium-241. Now this is an isotope that's used very prevalently in smoke detectors, even ones that are found inside of your home right now. A lot of smoke detectors in the United States use americium as an ion source to kind of bridge that gap inside of the smoke detector for the circuit. And so when smoke enters the smoke detector, it interrupts that circuit, which causes the alarm to go off. And so these industrial ones had multiple different sources of americium inside of them. Let's see how active this is. So I'm going to use the Radicode 103 right now. Now, americium is mainly a alpha emitter, but it does emit actually gamma radiation from when it's going from americium to neptunium. And so that's actually what I'm picking up on right now. So now what does this sound like with the Radii B20? Let's turn on the clicker. It doesn't sound that scary with the Radii. And the reason why is because these sources are down inside of this cavity here, and the alpha radiation doesn't go that far. And so if I was able to get this detector down inside of here, it'd be much more active. It'd be showing a much higher number. Now there's a bunch of different americium sources that are in here. This one's kind of interesting. It looks like this might have been another internal source. I'm not sure like what smoke detector this came out of, but this has little pieces of americium in like the form of a wire. And so if you put the Radicode 103 up to it, it's very active. So it's giving me around, let's see here, 700, 800,000 counts per minute. Yeah, so it's pretty active. Now I use counts per minute because it's more of a raw counting of the particles that are being detected. Now you can go and like see what the dose rate is on this. I'm going to switch this over on the app. And I can see that this is giving around 36 microsieverts of exposure. That this little disc that's what it's giving. So now the question is, since this is mainly an alpha emitter, what does a detector like the Radii B20 show when it's being exposed to this? Well, let's see. So I'll turn off the clicker there because it's just a straight whine. But what it's actually showing is it's overloading. There are too many particles coming off of this for this detector. This goes outside of its detectable range. And there are many detectors like that you're gonna buy out and about. But I actually have a treat. So I recently bought a Radii B20 ER, so now I have two of them. I'm gonna make a video about this one because it's kind of interesting. And so this one does the same thing where it goes into like a steady whine. Sounds a little bit different. So I'll turn that off because no one likes to hear that. And I'm putting this right on the detector like I did with the other one, but now I'm actually able to see what the counts per minute are on this detector, whereas the other one overloaded. So on this one, I'm getting around 1.5 million counts per minute coming from this americium source pushed right up against this detector, which is pretty impressive. Like, I've never been able to actually fully like read some of these sources because they're too hot for that other detector. And the Radicode 103, 102, or 103G that's coming out, those ones actually can't detect the alpha radiation. They're mainly just going to be detecting the gamma radiation and maybe some hard betas, but this just gives off alpha and gamma radiation. And so that's pretty cool to actually see what the other detector is capable of and actually know what those readings are. And so that's the source. And let's look at the other ones that are in here. Now these look like smaller americium sources. Now it's not great that these are just kind of like flopping around inside of this bag, kind of banging up together, but I'm not too worried about it because I mean, yeah, they're sources, and I think this is just like the inside of one because I don't think this is active at all. No, it's just reading these guys down here. Yeah, so this is just a piece of metal that was in there for some reason. Maybe it is contaminated, it's hard to tell. So now this is another americium source that was in that bag. There's actually two of them. And these are also very active. This has very much the same type of thing where it's like this like little strip of metal that's inside of here. And so we can listen to that. Like how active is that? That's pretty active. That's giving like around 25, 30,000, 40, 50. So right up against it, it's like right around like 50, 60,000 counts per minute. Yeah, it's like it doesn't do anything until it gets really close to it. Because the alpha radiation on these sources, these americium sources, they don't travel very far at all. And the gamma radiation that comes off of these is not as penetrating as, say, like a cobalt-60 source. Cobalt-60 sources give off a lot of gamma radiation, and their gamma radiation is really hard. And so with these, it's a softer gamma radiation. I know, with like, how is gamma radiation soft or hard? It just has to do with how much energy it's actually depositing into like the human body or into tissue or some other like form of measurement that they're going to be using. Like for like microsieverts, I think is actually or grays is the depositing of that energy into like human flesh or something like that. And so that's how dose rates are calculated. And so the dose rate for this is going to be a lot lower than for something that was just as active like this, except for it's like cobalt-60. That will be a much higher dose rate because that radiation, that gamma radiation, is a much higher energy level than this is. Man, it's really snowing outside. May, and it's snowing. That's how it works. So that's the sources all in this little guy here. I'll put them all back in this bag. And then we're going to move on to the other ones. So now, this is one of the other types of industrial smoke detectors. Now, this is kind of similar to the other ones that I've shown on this channel before, where like how they're taken apart and all that stuff. These are, usually they're unscrewed, or I think this one comes apart like this. Yeah, like that. And then there's one of those americium discs are down in here. So that was just down inside of here. So nothing too crazy about that. I mean, it's very similar to what I was just showing. And so I probably won't go into it again, other than maybe just like a quick reading. But yeah, so this is like that little disc source, that's what it came out of. It came out of this little guy right here. Now, I don't know how much the guy that had this actually disassembled these. It looks like, you know, it did come out a little bit, and this source came out very easily, so who knows. I haven't actually torn down these types of smoke detectors before. I've done the other ones where they have like a radioactive post on there and then some foil, which is what I'm assuming is on the inside of this right here. This rod is not radioactive, but the contents inside of here are. And so it's all part of the ionization chamber for these smoke detectors. So yeah, so a bunch of americium smoke detectors. Now these are actually fairly easy to find, like on eBay. You can pick them up very easily, actually. The radium ones are a lot more rare to find. They're, yeah, much harder to find, actually. Oh, but let's get a little reading before I put this all away. Okay, there we go. That guy just likes to stay in there, huh? Okay, it's the same thing. You know, it's... Yeah, it's amazingly radioactive when it gets close. But from far away, it's not that big of a deal. But now the Radicode picks up on different radiation, so it starts reacting a little bit closer to this than the Rad IB20, but for different reasons, because it's detecting gamma radiation as opposed to alpha radiation. But the Rad IB20 is also detecting that gamma radiation. Come on, is also detecting that gamma radiation from here as well. But it's just the Radicode is far more sensitive to gamma radiation than the Rad IB20 or the B20ER. So these smoke detectors were actually made to be taken apart, and so it's actually not that big of a deal to take them apart. The problem is that some people, and I get their concerns, is that if you were to be careless with this and like take the foil and like cut into that source to try and get it out of there, you could cause some pretty good contamination to your workspace, your house, your apartment, or whatever. And so it's a good idea to kind of like, you know, err on the side of caution when handling this stuff, because it's one of those things where you just don't want to get contamination everywhere, because it is extremely hard based off of your environment that you're working in. It can be extremely hard to clean up. And that's why it's also nice to have like a good detector that can actually detect, can be sensitive enough to detect the gamma radiation along with all the alpha and beta radiation from different sources. And so I know people always just want to buy one Geiger counter, one radiation detector, and to have it do it all. And it's like, that's not the way it works usually, is that there's different detectors for different purposes. But anyway, here's another americium detector, or americium smoke detector. And I'm not going to open that one up because I just did it. It'll just be, you know, redoing the whole thing. Okay, so this is the last thing in this box. Now, this has some interesting items in here. So this has this package. Just put off to the side there. Now, this is a test strip right here. Now, this is, it says radioactive material Geiger counter test card. And so this is just the test, a Geiger counter. And so more than likely, it usually has a little bit of uranium oxide on it or some thorium oxide on here to test the Geiger counter. And so it's a low activity source, but yes, it's definitely going to, you know, I gotta put some of this other stuff like away from this one so you can actually see what this one will do. It's not too terribly active. It's like right around 14,000 counts per minute. And so this is just the test Geiger counter to make sure that it's actually working. And some Geiger counters actually do come with a source like this to kind of make sure that it's actually operating correctly and that it actually will detect ionizing radiation. So these are good to have and pretty handy. So I'll put that over to the side right there and look at some of this other stuff that's in here. Now there's also this powder that's in here too. Now I'm not going to open this up because powders, radioactive powders kind of make me a little nervous because they are excellent at contaminating an area. And so I'm not going to mess around with that. But yeah, it's just one of those things where you just kind of like, yeah, I don't need to open that up. Yeah, but it is fairly active, you can tell. Nothing crazy, but definitely radioactive. Things in vials that are powders, you know, kind of. I'm not really one of those. I'm not really one of those things I want to mess with too much. So I'm going to keep this in this bag. So now I still had questions about these, so I actually had to take them out of the bag and put them in my lead castle and run a gamma spectrum on each of them individually to see what was inside of these without actually having to open them up. And what I found is that this white powder is actually thorium oxide, and the green powder is some type of uranium compound. That best explains the radiation that I was seeing and the gamma spectroscopy data that I'm seeing as well. So I'm not going to open these up any further because it's just asking for problems. But that's just the, kind of answer that question, because I hate doing videos where I don't I try to answer as many questions as I can, like questions that I have about certain things and that I imagine that the audience has as well. And so now you know. And then there is some other stuff in here too. It looks like there's this thing. Not sure what this is. Looks like it's a little radioactive. This thing could just be contaminated from the radon that's inside of this bag, or all the radon daughter products. And there's also this watch that's in here too, but this isn't radioactive at all either. I don't know why this is in here, because this isn't going to be radioactive. Again, I suspect that maybe the person that did this collection maybe put this watch in there because it got contaminated or something along those lines. So I'm gonna put all this stuff back in here, and then we're gonna open up this guy. Now this is kind of interesting. This is a package of radium watch hands. Now these make excellent sources in that they are great for calibrating, like the Radicode 103, 102, 103G, because they give off a bunch of different peaks for radium, for the gamma spectrum of radium. And they're actually very active. They glow in the dark. They react with a zinc sulfide screen. Actually, they still glow in the dark if you have like complete darkness and let your eyes adjust. You can actually see these still glowing. And so they're pretty cool. They're very radioactive, and since they're radium, it's one of those things where you want to be very, very careful with them, because the idea is not to spread that contamination, because radium is one of those things that it's a bone seeker. And so if you do get that contamination and you actually ingest it, it can be one of those things that'll actually, your body will mistake it for calcium and incorporate it into your bones. And that's what happened with the girls that painted a lot of these watch hands, the radium girls, but they were ingesting like loads of radium, and that's why they got so sick and died. It's because of their dose was so massive compared to what you would even get from just swallowing one of these. So this is a bunch of watch hands in here. And they're pretty radioactive, because radium, like I said, radium is a great source to use because it's extremely active. And it has a bunch of different peaks, like for gamma radiation. But they're not too terribly dangerous. As long as you kind of handle them with care and wear gloves when you handle them. That's what I would suggest doing. You know, some of these are, some watch hands can be very old and the paint will actually start flaking off of them. And that can be a pretty big problem. Just as far as like a contamination thing goes, because you just, like I said, you just want to be careful when collecting radioactive stuff to watch out for contamination. Because contamination is one of those things that it will get you. Like it can really ruin your day. And then you'll have the EPA visiting your house or something along those lines. The idea, I mean, I kind of joke around, but that actually did happen in the past with a guy that was trying to make a nuclear reactor in his shed, David Hahn, which I'll talk about that guy in another video, but that guy went and contaminated like this whole shed, and they made an example out of that guy, because I don't think what he was doing was actually so dangerous, but it was definitely one of those things where they saw this guy doing this thing and they wanted to make an example out of him so no one would follow his footsteps. So that's what, these are radium watch hands, and then there's more of them in here as well. It's kind of cool. They're in like a little like thing to keep them from being bent or damaged. But it's the same thing. It's a bunch of radium watch hands. You can have this little folded up piece of paper, and you can actually use this Radicode to see what it is, because you don't even have to open it up, because it will actually tell you what it is based off of the gamma energy signature. So now, these do produce a lot of radon. That's one thing that radium does do, is that does produce a lot of radon. I mean, nothing dangerous. You'd have to like just be huffing these a lot to have it be like a big problem. But it's definitely something to think about if you're trying to control contamination, because the contamination that comes off of radon can be as like a radioactive dust. And it's not so bad, because usually that radioactive dust decays away pretty quickly into like a more stable, still radioactive form of lead that has like a half-life of 22 years, which is lead-210. But these are, like I said, they're great sources and for calibration and stuff like that if you have a Radicode, because of the different peaks that this gives. It has a big, wide gamma spectrum of different isotopes that are associated with the decay of radium. And these watch hands are going to be radioactive for a very long time. Radium has a half-life of about 1,600 years. And so even if these were made 100 years ago, they've barely degraded at all. And actually, they're probably more radioactive than when they were first made, because when radium is first separated and then put onto something, it has to build up those decay products, which actually can add to the radioactivity of like what you're detecting with radium. And so, yeah. So I'm going to put these guys away too. Let's get these guys all nestled away here. There's so much of this stuff on eBay, it's like extremely easy to get. Like they sell old watch hands, like for people to actually repair watches, you know, because if people want to actually, like they have an old watch that's from the time period of when they actually were using radium, you want to use original parts. And so there are a bunch of radium watch hands that are out there for different like restoration kits for different watches and stuff like that. With watches, they used to use radium all the time. And they switched away from that and actually started using tritium now in watches and in compasses and anything that you want to have illuminated in the dark that you don't need to charge up. And so that's where things have kind of transitioned to, because the radiation that you can detect from tritium is very low and very, it's like a very low gamma energy that actually comes from the interaction of the beta particles hitting the phosphorus inside of the container that's stored the tritium gas that makes it glow. And so that's mainly what you're going to detect with tritium. It's a very low X-ray basically. There's one other thing that's actually not in this case, and I keep this kind of separate because I don't want to contaminate it with the radon daughter products that are found inside of this case. And that are some radioisotope test discs. Now, these are very interesting in that these are actually used to kind of calibrate certain detectors, and I actually use it to calibrate the Radicode detectors as well, because the cobalt 60 that's in here is good because it's like a really high energy gamma radiation, and so you can like kind of calibrate like way off to like the right hand side of the peak. And then strontium 90, that's a beta emitter, and then polonium 210 that's in here too. That's a alpha emitter, and so these are actually pretty cool, and you know, they're all going to go dead one of these days. So now the polonium 210 that I have here would have probably been a lot more active if I did this video a lot sooner. This box was actually sent to me some months ago, like over the summer when I was on that Oppenheimer job. And this is like my first time actually being able to get around to doing this. And so here's what this sounds like. So this is a almost pure alpha source. Now this would have been much more radioactive if I would have done this video over the summer, because the half-life of polonium 210, I think is like what is it, like 128 days or something like that. And so it decays away very quickly. And so it's a good source though to have, because it's a good like alpha emitting source, but it does decay away extremely quickly. And so to have that like in a collection, or if you like find something that you used to use like polonium 210, like in spark plugs or some other types of like tubes, like an old like amplifier tube sets and stuff like that, those go dead. As far as like the radioactivity that you're able to detect, those go dead pretty quick, because the polonium 210 just like decays away very quickly. But it's also extremely active. It's a great alpha source if you can get one that's fresh. So that's the problem now, is like that every day that I measure this, it's actually going to be a little bit less, noticeably a little bit less every time. So the Radicode isn't going to really, it's detecting this other stuff that's right here. And the other stuff that's like right there too, but this isn't going to detect the radiation off of this polonium 210 source. Now the other sources are strontium 90, and cobalt 60. Now these sources are pretty radioactive. Strontium 90 is a great beta emitter. So that's getting like 100, like 190, like, yeah, 90 to 100,000 counts per minute of beta radiation. Again, good source to have. As far as like, even though, since it's mainly beta radiation, it's not going to show up too terribly well on the Radicode 102 or 103, but it will show up because the beta radiation is hard enough to react with that. And it actually probably does give off some gamma radiation. And then last but not least is the cobalt 60 one. Now this is going to show up as a very high dose on the Radicode. So yes, on the Radicode, it's giving me like 130, 125 microsieverts per hour off of this source, which is pretty strong comparatively to other sources. And that's because of the harder type of radiation that this cobalt 60 source is emitting. So yeah, even the Radii B20 gives around 24,000 counts per minute for this type of source. I can kind of see why this guy wanted to send me this stuff. Mainly because, you know, it's an interesting collection. I actually enjoyed doing this, you know, seeing like what other people collect and like what they're into. But please don't send me a bunch of stuff because I don't need to collect any more than what this is right here from other people. It's one of those things where it's like, you know, I'm always interested to see what other people collect, but I don't need to have that part of my collection. I've got my own collection that's more than adequate, and sometimes I try and like whittle it down so where I don't have to deal with so much of it. One of these days I'll go over it, but this was interesting to see what someone else spent the time and energy into collecting. And this case actually does a fairly good job. The only thing I don't like about it is that you have to like pick it up from the bottom because there's like no way to like hook this like onto here so you can pick it up by the handle here. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.